Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Textiles and Tea, brought to you by Handweavers Guild of America. If you've been with us in the past, I'm not Kathy Group. I'm David Heustess from Nashville, Tennessee, and I have the privilege of subbing for Kathy this afternoon and introduce you to our guest today, Veronica A. Perez. This afternoon, our sponsor is Halcyon Yarns. And if it's been a while, visit their website. Wow, is that a user-friendly, easy to get around website that these people have put together for you? So we thank them for their sponsorship today. And of course, we can't do this without sponsorships from these kind of companies and from you, our members. We welcome your questions this afternoon, and we'll attempt to address as many of them as possible. Please use the the Q&A box for your questions. It's easier for me to look for them there, and we will get to those towards the end of our program this afternoon. We welcome these questions because they really do help us a lot. Today, we're having tea with Veronica Perez. Veronica is an artist exploring erasure, identity, and interdependency through personal work and community-driven braiding circle workshops. Pèrez earned a BFA from Maine College of Art and Design in 2014 and an MFA from Maine College of Art in 2016. They received the Ellis Beauregard Visual Arts Fellowship in 2020 and fellowships at Indigo Arts Alliance in 2021 and the Lunder Institute at Colby College in 2022. Their solo exhibitions include Voices, Whispering, and Shadow Echo Memory. In 2023, they won the St. Botolph Emerging Artist Award and the Amelia Peabody Award. Named a 2024 Maine Artist Fellow, they work at Indigo Arts Alliance and are a co-organizer of Tender Table. And Veronica, welcome.
Hey, how's it going, David? And everyone?
It's great, thank you. And as you were telling me earlier, it's snowing in Maine, where you live and work?
Yeah, it definitely is snowing. A little free. Oh, now it stopped. Now it stopped.
There you go. A break in the weather there. Everyone's burning question. What's your tea today?
Oh, my tea today is a dirty chai, but I also have a bottle of water too. So
No way. I'm having a dirty chai in honor of Kathy. Chai is her favorite tea, I heard. So had to
I
put
love
that
that.
one together. Yes. Good, good, good. And then we all want to know how someone gets started in fiber arts. And do you even consider yourself a fiber artist?
That is a great question and one that I get asked a lot because, like you said, I went to school for sculpture. And so I have a background in woodworking and welding. And when I started to explore fiber arts when I just started to explore fiber arts in my studies and stuff like that, um, it was kind of always downplayed as this, and this isn't meant to be derogatory, but this is like how people view it. And this is definitely not how I view it. It was always women's work, and it's kind of less than because it's like simple materials. And so every time I would try to engage with those materials, I would really get a lot of pushback from professors and other artists saying, "Oh, you have lots to say. You could say it with metal, or you can say it with this or that." And it's like, well, great. That's not what I want to use. And so, and what I was trying to say wasn't coming out the right way with the materials I was trying to use because, I'm trying to talk about the body, I'm trying to talk about memory. And what better way to talk about those things than to use something that has um, like living things inside of it. And I'm speaking specifically about hair. And so when I was at the end of my MFA, somebody had given me a bag of hair, like a bag of artificial hair, which I'm braiding here right now. And they were like, I think you could use this. And I was like, I most definitely can use it. And so I do accept the nomenclature of textile artist, and I wear it with honor because I've never called myself a textile artist, but it was other textile artists that I've admired that have called me that. And I feel that that's such a special place to be. And the community of textile artists are just so engendering and warm and welcoming. And they really wanted to help me to say what I needed to say with the material that I needed to say it with.
Amazing. What an experience to have gone through. Oh my goodness. That gave me goosebumps.
Ooh,
Um,
perfect.
we're going to take a look at your work and the use of hair.
Hmm.
I assume there's more than the first bag that you were given, although
Much more.
sometimes it can last a while. And the use of hair in your work is more than just using an unusual material, because obviously you've explored a lot of use of materials as a sculptor. Is it symbolic and personal to you? And would you share with us the meaning of using hair? And when was that first time, besides the bag given to you, that you started um, really making strong use of it? That's a lot of questions in one breath.
No, no, no. I'm trying to figure out which pattern I want to answer them in. I think I got it figured out.
You got
So
it.
the first time I used hair was like, as you said, like the first time I got the bag of hair, but that's just like, material exploration. And I'm not really sure why I wanted to use it at that time, but it slowly revealed to me that hair is such an intimate and such a mundane material. We all have it or we don't have it. And I've had people that have come to my braiding circles that have had like alopecia or baldness, and there's still a resonance there with them and again, this is not derogatory, with the lack of hair. And so when I really started to use it with purpose was when, a lot of my work is about the Puerto Rican diaspora and how colonization and gentrification can kind of like upset the balance of an identity. And so my father traveled from Puerto Rico to America when he was about 10 years old. And he joined the US Army. And when he joined the Army, he had to cut his afro. And I remember him telling this story. Like he had this huge, I have a tattoo on my back of my father, and he has a huge afro, and I love it so much. And so when that's a little inside information. So when he had to cut it off, like I didn't really understand why he was so like forlorn about it and like really mourning that loss. And it was because it really connected him back to the island of Puerto Rico, back to his culture and his people as a brown man. And so I didn't really understand that.
We glitched just a little bit here.
We glitched a minute because my headphones died.
Okay.
And so when I started using hair in earnest, I really looked back to that story and really was starting to use hair with a purpose and really understanding like how this really inane material can begin to elicit these emotions such as like love and loss and grief. And I began to see, because as I said before, when I was using all these other materials, I realized I was always trying to evoke a sense of the body or a sense of humanity. And metal, wood, I mean, you can make it like that, but I guess for me, in where I was, I needed something to elicit that a little bit more, and that's where hair and textiles came in to me. I know you asked a couple more questions, so if you wouldn't mind repeating the first two again.
Not a problem. I'm loving the layers that you're revealing just within right there. So I think out of that, we got the personal and the symbolic. What is there, and there's an intention behind it, obviously. What's the meaning behind using hair? We talked about using different materials, but what something voice in your head or whatever went off and said, ah, this is it?
I think it was when I started the braiding circles. And I have to say that when I first started using hair in like my very early sculptures, you know, when you're starting out with a new material, you're kind of just like playing around a little bit. And so you're not really not understanding, but you're still trying to figure out like, okay, what does this mean to me? How does it fulfill what I'm trying to say in my artistic practice? And the more and more that I use the hair, the more and more that I saw that some of the symbolic factors of hair, I kept coming back to memory. I kept coming back to storytelling every time I would think about hair. And so to go back to why I started the braiding circles, some of those reasons were because when I was using hair in my own personal story, I realized that like I have my own personal story, but there's so many other people out there that have the same, different, or, you know, kind of the same stories as I do. And they can all elicit those emotions through hair. And so I think that one of the symbolic reasons and what it means to me is it brings back those stories, that humanity and that history. You know, I show a lot of the times when I'm working, a lot of the times when I give an artist talk, I always like to show an image of, and maybe this might be a little morbid for people, but I hope not. But there's a lot of these skulls that they have unearthed in like Peru and South America, and they have their skulls, you know, their bones, but they still have their hair. And I love that lasting power of hair. And it kind of symbolizes to me the lasting power of stories, that like everything else might be gone, but there is that story there still like kind of waiting to be unearthed.
Yes. And I believe that in Peru, a mummy was discovered, and the mummification happened because of being wrapped in their own hair.
Isn't that wild? Like
Wow.
it's just such a beautiful sentiment. Just how it encapsulated this person and protected them
Yes.
and its hair.
And we want to see a slide of one of your braiding circles, which I think is up next. And there's one thing to working individually, but then there's another to coming together. So can we take a look at the braiding circle slide and talk about I mean, obviously there's something happening here. I know it's during COVID, but what is going on? How do you bring people together with this purpose in mind? And what is the purpose behind it?
So the braiding circle's initial purpose, I had a show in 2022 at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art, and I was making these really big sculptures. And I was like, I need to make a lot of braids now. And so I like got a bunch of my friends and we went into my studio and we're all braiding hair. And this was before the braiding circle's inception. And as we're braiding all of this hair, we're talking about these experiences that we've had when we've had a bad haircut, or when our mom was brushing our hair, or a time that somebody might have said something derogatory towards us about our hair. And it was in that group where I realized, I was like, oh snap, like there's something's happening here. And it's affecting the way I make work in a very positive way, because like I said earlier, I have my story, but there is a myriad of stories. And so basically what the braiding circles turned into is exactly what you see here. It's people getting together and we're braiding, and it's a very low key, I'm a very low key chill person. And so like, I wanted a low key thing, but I also add in some topics of conversation that we can have. Like I'll ask people like, what was a memory you have of your mother brushing your hair? Or when was a time you got a bad haircut? Or when was a time that somebody made a derogatory comment about your hair? Exactly the same things we're talking about, to talk about these issues specifically in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities about identity and their hair. And so, like I said, I didn't set out to do this. I was an artist. I worked by myself in my studio. But I think, and we were talking about this earlier, I come from a background of being a teacher, and I also come from a background of being a social worker. And so I'm very invested in people and their stories. And so I think it was an amalgamation of like my history, employment, the way that I wanted to tell stories, and the material that I used, that I created the braiding circles. And another aspect of the braiding circles I should talk about is, people do braid the hair for me. I take it back to the studio, I make the sculptures, but also at these braiding circles, I ask people if they want to privately share a story with me. And so I'm also archiving these oral histories from Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that might not have been archived or nobody had asked them. And I'm collecting these stories. And as I'm collecting these stories, I'm putting them into a Bluetooth speaker and making them play inside of the sculpture. And so you get this kind of visceral sense of like these hands braiding this hair, this person telling you the story, and you start to think about these issues with regards to colonization, with regards to identity and love and loss and all of the other things that my work encompasses. So I think I gave you kind of a long answer about the braiding circles, but that's one of the reasons, that's a lot of the reasons why I wanted to start those gatherings.
Yeah, and a lot of artists will call people together to help them build, construct, or make parts to be assembled later into a whole. But this sounds like you have to take on other roles, almost to a friendship or a trust kind of position, or even a counselor, either with the whole group or the individual. So what a great opportunity for people that have been part of your braiding circles.
Absolutely. And like, I'll add another part onto that is that when I go into communities, I try and work with communities like more than once. So like, because I'm not going to ask somebody to share a very personal story with me, be like, hey, can you do this thing for me? And then I'm going to take this story and then I'm going to go and put it up for myself. You know what I mean? And so I wanted to be, because I've worked in a social setting with people. And so I wanted to be very intentional and very mindful and thoughtful about the ways in which I worked with people. And so I'll do multiple braiding circles with the same organization so I can unequivocally build that trust, not in kind of a surface way, but in a deeper way, so that these stories and these pieces resonate and the people that are sharing them actually feel like they're a part of the work.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to save a question from that, and we're going to move on to the next slide, which shows the braided hair in your lap, and then a finished piece. I assume the same work from one to the other on display in the gallery. So we're intrigued by the fact that it's totally just you and the hair. There's no crochet hook, there's no loom, there's no tools involved except for the ones that you were born with. So can you talk about that process and what the hands-on opportunity means to you?
I love this question. I loved it when you posed it the other day when we had a little check-in. And hands have always been something in my work. Like I'm looking off to the side because I also make a lot of molds of my own hand to display um, as my art pieces as well too. And so hands and work and labor have always been a really big part of my practice as well too. And I think it goes back to that humanity, people being able to see the humanity, people being able to see the physicality in the work. And so when I'm working on a piece, especially if it's something big like this, I tried to make it work with a crochet hook and it wasn't working. And so the material kind of lend itself to me to be like, okay, you can't do this with a tool. You need to do this with your hands. But I also think that in doing it with my hands, and I've had other people say this to me too, which is why I'm saying it now, is that you conjure up when you're braiding or when you're doing something, you're imbuing and you're thinking about all of these stories that you want to imbue into the sculpture and into the braid. And so I really like that aspect of it because it feels like these aren't objects, or I should say, these aren't textiles for me just to put over a form that I make, but they're the actual stories and labor of people because their hands are actually touching the material. And like you said, there's nothing in between that. And so I think I'm answering that with like a word salad, but I think what I'm trying to say is I think that there's a special connection when, and a special thing that happens when you're passing your story on to your artwork. And I know that can't happen all the time. Like I'm not going to weld without gloves because like that's just not right. Or I'm not going to use resin without gloves. But I think that that's what's so special about being a textile artist too, is that you can dive right in and you can get your hands like inside of the work and it gets caught like on your nails and stuff like that. And so there's this like, there's this beautiful, like, what am I trying to say? There's just this beautiful symbiotic relationship between you and the textiles that there's nothing in between. And you can just feel it, just like you feel something or feel an emotion. There's a lot of different layers there.
Yeah, it seems very respectful of the people that you've been working with, and very honoring at the same time. Can you tell us, I know usually in galleries like those kind of floating walls are about 6 feet tall. How large is that piece?
I think that wall was 8 feet. And so I think that piece was 6 feet. I also had no clue how to display it. And so I kind of liked this display method. I kind of didn't, but I feel like I maybe should have shown it on the ground or something, but obviously this is what we went with. Because I wanted to show the weightiness of the blanket that I was making. And so it's a 6 by 6 foot blanket.
Any idea how many braids are in there?
You know, I always want to count them and then I always forget.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really wish I did know though, but I have no idea.
I'm the same way. I would lose track alone.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing though. I'm sorry. Oh, and so to go along with that, is this planned out, like you've done drawings and sketches or studied hair designs or styles before you begin a work, or do you just pick up what's created from your braiding circles and have at it?
In the beginning, when I was first working with hair, I didn't really know how to give it structure. And so I was like, how do I give hair? This doesn't have any structure. What is this? You know? And so I was like, being a sculptor, you want to give things a 3D form. And so I was like, how do I do this? And so when I go into my studio, I'm looking off because I'm looking at my work and figuring out how I make it. It's a real intuitive process. So I don't really do any sketches. I don't really do anything like that. I think it's in part because I'm a really bad drawer and painter, but let's not talk about that today. So I like to be really intuitive with my materials and just kind of let them kind of guide me along the way. And so the cool thing about that is that some of the pieces we'll see later are made out of chicken wire. And so, you know, chicken wire kind of wants to do its own thing. And it's really beautiful when you can get it into these really like enigmatic and abstract shapes that kind of like, you know, that pulse out and then they go back in. And so like I like these really big peaks and valleys. So I have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't like draw something down and then do it. I kind of make the, like with the blanket, I knew I wanted to make a blanket, so I made a blanket. With these other pieces, I kind of like shape the chicken wire in a way that I want it to be shaped, and then I lay the braids on top of it. And that's when really exciting things start to happen, because the braids, depending on which way they go and which way they kind of flow around the piece, it makes it look like water is ebbing and flowing, or the hair is moving around the piece. And so I really like that I'm not totally leaving it up to chance, but I'm also kind of somewhere in the middle of like sketched out and chance. Like I'm right in the middle of where I'm like, okay, I'm going to let this thing do its thing. I'm going to let the hair kind of do its thing, but I think I know what I want out of this, and it's been successful so far. So I'm not going to touch it if it's not broken.
So you're bringing back those conversations from the braiding circles and then having a conversation with the chicken wire and the hair to see what they want to be about and going with the flow. I love the water reference to that. I wouldn't have thought about that. Let's look at this work that's titled 15. And you talked about those stories that you were talking about, but it's this container, and I guess this might refer back to the water and the flowing of it. Uh, this could mean almost anything to any viewer. What does it mean to you?
So this piece, I'm so sorry if I didn't provide you with the title, but this piece is called Infinite Distance.
Oh, okay.
And so sorry about that. My apologies. And I knew that I wanted to make something that kind of referenced like a continuation, kind of like an Ouroboros type of thing, where one thing is following the next and it's just a continual loop. I'm a really big science fiction fan, and so I feel like there's a lot of science fiction and references in my work. And so like I think a lot about a Mobius strip, or I think a lot about an Ouroboros, where you can be on the same continuity at the same time, but you're just like a little bit off. And so with this piece, I really wanted it to seem like the braids were never going to end and never going to stop, because there is an infinite distance inside of all of us that we have and that we experience day to day. And so I really, and also the title came from being so disconnected from my heritage that I felt like there was an infinite distance in between. But with that being said, I feel like it has to end up somewhere. And so I made this container and I made this really long braid. I think that braid inside is like 25 feet maybe, and I made it like kind of come out and spill out. But you can see an end, but you can't see the beginning. So you know that there's kind of something there. You know where you've started, but you know where you're at. Let's see where you can go. And you know that there's something there. So, you know, it's still like a search for an identity, or a search for your heritage, or a search for your culture. It might not be the easiest way to traverse, but you'll eventually find it.
So it makes me think inside the container is the past, and let's not worry about that, and let's move on into the present and be ready for the future.
Yeah.
Kind of.
While still honoring that.
Still honoring the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Interesting too. I
Yeah.
love the textures. Yeah, and we're going to be best friends because I love science fiction too. So we're just,
Oh, good.
as I'm learning more and more about you, this is great. Yeah, yeah. So I think we move on to, is this the one that has the audio to it as well, or is that the next slide? I got confused.
That might be the next slide. I don't think it's that piece we just showed didn't have this. Usually I put it in the big sculptures. So yeah, that one didn't have audio.
Andy, can we go to the next one? Thank you. There it is.
That
Beautiful.
One.
So we have the full length, which is almost like the blanket, right? And then we have a detail of it where everybody hopefully can see the braids and everything. So this one has the audio. It's sharing the stories that you've collected from the braiding circles. And the title of it is Who's Going to Take Care of Me When You Die? That I think people really need to see this in person and hear the stories to have an appreciation of it, along with being able to enjoy it today. The title implies a fear of the future or a fear of someone's well-being. And for you, do the oral histories echo those fears? The stories that you choose, are they relating what you are feeling with this work?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Did I get deep?
Gave me the chills. It's interesting that you asked that question because I had a bunch of thoughts just pop into my head. So one of them is, when I first started making work, before I started doing the braiding circles, I was really focused on terror and tragedy and death and destruction. And I really couldn't get out of that way of thinking just because, you know, I mean, the world that we live in, the things that I was dealing with, like with the Puerto Rican diaspora, how Christopher Columbus eradicated the Taino people who were the indigenous people in Puerto Rico. And so my work was mired in this really like dark and dense and just tragedy. And so when I started doing the braiding circles, and this will all tie back into the title, I promise you that. When I started doing the braiding circles, I realized that I can't live in that tragic world. There has to be joy with sadness. There has to be happiness with anger. There has to be light with darkness. Like there has to be these dichotomies that we live with. Like it's okay to be sad, but we have to also be happy. You know what I mean? And that's very easy for me to say. Not easy for me to be happy, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And so when I was making, not specifically this work, but works in the past, I was really focused on death and destruction. When I started making the braiding circles work, I realized that a lot of the people that I was gleaning oral stories from were focusing, you know, in the beginning on like sadness and grief, but their stories always ended with, and then I saw this thing about myself and I realized that I am beautiful, or I remembered that my mother does love me, even though we had this fight. And so there was always like this light shining after all of this darkness that they had shared. And so I'm happy that I've kind of made that shift to, you know, not being stuck in the mud anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with mud, but to not being stuck in that place anymore, to a place of like joyful and happiness. And I think you can see that in my most recent work, but we're not talking about that. And so for this piece, Who's Going to Take Care of Me When You Die? I don't know if you like horror movies, David, but I also enjoy a good horror movie. And a lot of my work is positioned in that way as well, too, where, you know, one of the reasons that I like horror movies is because, you know, they put up a mask, they put up a mirror to society a lot of the times. And there's so many different ways to tell stories. And I think I appreciate horror movies because they're not afraid to go there. And let's be real life is a little bit more scary right now than any kind of horror movie. I'll take Jason any day over what's happening now. This title, Who's Going to Take Care of Me When You Die, is from one of my favorite movies called Hereditary. And this movie is all about how generational trauma manifests inside of us. And so what I was trying to do with the title was, who's going to take care of me when you die? These voices inside of here will take care of you. Your community will take care of you. This big braided entity that's here will take care of you. And so it's kind of like, if the viewer, or like if I'm asking a question, who's going to take care of me? And it's like this sculpture is answering back saying like, it's going to be me, I will. And I really wish that you could see this in person, because it's so much better. It kind of sticks out of the wall. And in that little slit right there, that's where you put your ear. And that's where the sound comes out of it. And it's about, I want to say about 12 or 13 feet tall too. And so that was one of the sculptures that I really liked making as well too, just because of its size, just because of its presence. You know, when you first see it, you think it's kind of like ominous, but once you get closer to it and once you feel the soft hair and you hear these stories, you're very much comforted by it.
So I would see the different braids and textures and the dimensional quality coming out from the wall, and yet I have to come my ear almost onto the braids to hear the stories.
Yeah, kind of like, so I put them, you know, sometimes galleries don't have the best sound quality. And so I use this little speaker here, and I put it like right, you know, behind all the hair. And so you got to kind of get like maybe that close to it to hear it. But I think the cool thing is that you can kind of feel the hair from the sculpture like brushing you on the face.
Yes.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, what an intimate experience that you're giving the viewer there, because you can be caressed by hair. You can, and then you can listen to people's stories by being that close to the hair. This is amazing. I had no idea all that was going on in this.
And I think that circles back to the intimacy that we find in the braiding circles, because, you know, this is a very vulnerable and intimate time. And it also goes back to the intimacy that we have when somebody is brushing our hair. You know, when somebody's brushing your hair, they're usually behind you, and that's a really vulnerable place to be. And so there's an intimacy and a safety associated with that. And so I think that that's when I started thinking about intimacy and safety, which I'm really glad you brought up that word. I started thinking about how I can engender people to look at these sculptures not as like monolithic beings, but as like these soft entities that are willing to wrap you in their care.
Yeah. I can imagine that out of the bundle of braids, as you're working, there may be like, oh, not this one yet, but that one now. Is that the same with the stories that you have? Or how do you select which stories we're going to hear into a piece?
So I do that in a couple, I do that in like, I'm not gonna say a couple different ways because that's a lie. So when I do my braiding circles, and when I show my work, it's kind of like right now I'm working on a project, a braiding circles project that I started in 2023, and I have a show in 2026. So all of the stories that I've collected in these 3 years will be presented at that show. And the same goes with iterations in the past, like the ones like the show from 2022, all the stories I collected in 2020 and 2021 went into that show. And so I don't leave any stories out because I don't have a lot of stories. I think max I've collected maybe 20 stories. So it's not a lot. And so they're not that long either. And so I put them all in. So there's not like there's an editing process when it comes to like cutting down some parts out that might be superfluous to the story. But I usually just include everything because I love hearing people's voices. I love hearing people's takes on their hair. And I love hearing people talk about their culture and their history. So it's very hard for me to throw some of them out. I just keep them all in.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I'm loving your process. It's really, really interesting.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Well, but you know, a lot of times people like they settle into something. And so you've done X number of works with Black braids, but then you made a turn and started to incorporate color into your work. Can you talk about making those choices? And I think we have examples of, is this newer work? Is this a turn in a different direction? Where are we here with these pieces?
So that's actually work that I've done in, I want to say when I just got out of grad school in like 2016, 2017. So this is on the earlier side when I first started working with hair. And so when I first started working with it, I was working with all colors of hair, all gamuts of hair, and kind of like incorporating everything. When I started honing my practice and when I started honing in on exactly what I wanted to say, the color actually drained out of the work. Well, I wouldn't say drained. The color was kind of left behind, and I just focused on black and brown hair. And there's a few reasons for that. I think one is aesthetically. I think artists, we have a really cool chance to just use what we like. And I like the color black and I love the color brown. And also black and brown hair, a lot of the times has been like demonized. You know, I think of a lot of the times, because I talk to a lot of Black women about their hair and about their hair process, and they have graciously shared with me a lot of their hair history and hair culture with me to kind of like situate myself in my work. And so I specifically use the colors black and brown to kind of I don't want to say pay homage, because that's not the right word, but to kind of focus on the demonization that Black women and brown women have found when it comes to their hair. And I also have brown hair. I mean, it comes specifically from my story and from so many other Black, brown, and Indigenous people's stories who usually have dark hair. And that's not meant to leave out all of the Black, brown, and Indigenous people that might have red hair or blonde hair or, you know, a different color hair. That's just how I'm making my work at this time and using the colors that I'm using. So it was kind of a little bit of an opposite. Like I used the color at first, and then the color got drained out and I started focusing on the black and brown hair.
Oh, interesting. Sorry that I had it backwards, but this is very interesting. That's very interesting.
No apology needed.
Before we go into questions, want to see the final slide. The end is never the end. Is that right? Is that what we have next?
I don't see a slide. I'm so sorry.
There we go.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Now, this one is obviously not hair. What's happened here?
So I can't remember how I came up with this idea, but you know, when you look at hair, the strands, look how small they are.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I really want to blow up a strand of hair. And so that's where it came from. I created these big, long satin and silk tubes, filled them with stuffing. And also like remnants, like I have a lot of offcuts like this, like stuff I can't use. And I fill it inside of the tubes. And so I wanted to make like a big braid. Like I wanted to make like a massive size braid. And so that's kind of where it came from. And when I was working with these pieces, some of them are bigger than me. Some of them are smaller than me. Some of them are as round as me or as very skinny. And when I was moving them, I was using my whole body to move them into position. And so again, I'm always trying to bring the body or bring some kind of physicality back into it. When I was in undergrad, I did a lot of performance-based work, and I think that might be where it comes from. But I remember making this piece and kind of like situating it in the corner and kind of like braiding it together. And there was always this hug and this caress and dance that me and this piece would do together. And I remember something that my father said to me before he passed away, because he passed away almost 20 years ago, which is wild. And so a lot of the work comes from him and is about him and is about his culture and his history and his life. And I remember he said to me once, and I'm sure this was probably a saying from one of our favorite horror movies or sci-fi movies, because we were really commiserated on that. he said to me, the end is not the end. And I always kind of like held that with me, and I imbued it in this piece because you, again, with the infinite distance piece, you can't see the end of this piece. So the end is not the end. It's just the beginning. You're continuously going around, and I'm always going to find him in everything and every artwork that I make, and in everything that I do. And so I think that's where the title from this piece comes from. And I think that's what I was trying to do with this piece too, was just to make a big braid to just be held and caressed by.
Amazing. I know that if I was in a gallery viewing this, because I can tell from the slide, and along with your answer, I'm waiting for it to stand up and walk across the room, kind of.
I'm really glad that you said that. That's exactly what I want from these works specifically.
Yeah, amazing.
Thank
Very
you.
nice. Yeah. I assumed switching to that material, you still had your organic sense of, I kind of know what I want to do, but I'm going to move along and see what happens, kind of.
Yeah. I'm
Mm.
kind of like a do something first and ask questions later. Like, let's see what happens. Let's just get it going.
Yes, yes. Now, I want to make sure we get to these next
Yeah.
slides. So we're not off script and we still have time, but oh my God, this is a difference. So can you talk to us about Sugar Arm artwork?
Yeah, sure. So this was a piece that I made in 2020 that was a part of Space Galleries, which is a gallery in Portland, Maine. Space Gallery's Recite program, where you reimagine a piece of history from your perspective. And so they gave us a compendium of histories to look at. And there was Black histories, there was Indigenous histories, but there was no Latinx histories. And I was like, I don't feel right talking about a Black or a Indigenous history, because that's not my story. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it didn't feel aligned with like my ethos. And so I found this story about how the West Indies and Puerto Rico was really influential in the foundation of Portland, Maine, through their rum and sugar trade, largely left out of the books. But I worked with a professor at, it was either Bates or Bowdoin or one of the colleges here, and they found stories for me. And so I was like, that's amazing. And I remember reading this one book, and it talked about the historical silencing that Latinx people faced when they first came here, or when they were trading with America in the very early days of America's inception. And that piece, historical silencing, had always like resonated with me. And that's what this piece is called. So basically what's happening here is I created 15 sugar arms, because sugar was one of the big imports traded out of Puerto Rico and the West Indies. And I put them in the water. And then on the inside, it's filled with hair. So as the ocean comes up and takes the sugar away, you're left with the hair, kind of symbolizing like, you know, you can like, it can be taken away, but it's still here and we're still present, speaking to specifically to Latinx people, that they are not silenced, that they were still here and are still here as positioned by the hair. And I always like this picture because the one on the right, the hair, and maybe everyone's going to be like, well, whatever, but anyway, it kind of looks like a person. It kind of looks like a person holding something. And I really like that image came out like that after the ocean water kind of ravaged it away, that there was still this presence left over after everything was said and done.
Interesting. And this is a short video that we're going to get to actually see the sugar washed away. It's a different installation, but same idea. Is that correct?
Yeah, same idea. I was able to do it again for another program. And so I knew that I wanted to ramp it up. I knew that I wanted to kind of push that idea of people not being erased, but people still being trapped at the same time. And so that's what the addition of the cage is for. And yeah.
We can do the water washing and everything.
Yeah, that was like 3 months of work that was like washed away in like maybe 3 minutes.
Are you
And
kidding me?
it was crazy. It's crazy how fast, as soon as the water, it kind of like sucks it up and
Yeah.
just, you know, and all of those were also filled with hair too, which you can't see. But I saved it, which is really weird. It's filled with like seaweed and all this other stuff. But yeah. And I did work with a biologist at the University of Southern Maine to ensure
Mhm.
that like the sugar that I was putting into the ocean wouldn't harm any of the aquatic life there as well too.
Yeah, thank you for that. What's it like to spend all this time on something and then just watch it basically disappear before your very eyes? Is it an emotional response for you, or a sense of relief that it's completed and it did what it's supposed to do? What's going on for you?
I think all of that. I think a little bit of sadness, um, but I think the sadness comes more from the ephemeral thing that I'm talking. Well, not the ephemeral thing that I'm talking about, from the actual thing that I'm talking about. The sadness of the silencing and how that has happened over generations of specifically Puerto Rican people, and definitely relief when it's over, because I'm like, oh, I'm done. I'm done with this project now. But
Is
yeah, it's very mixed emotions.
is the temporary type of work something that you're interested in pursuing, or was that just for that type of?
No, I would do it again. I would definitely do it again. It's a lot of work, but I also really, really, really enjoy it. So I would definitely do it again, but I've been in my studio sculpting away and it's too cold to go outside.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not going to work everywhere that you might want to install it and things like that.
No, and I should say I specifically chose that location because we each had to choose a location. And so I chose that location, which was located on the East End Beach in Portland, Maine, partly because the Friends of East End, which is a local organization that protects the beaches, let me use it. And also, there's a place there called the Ocean's Gateway, which is like a place to have weddings, but it used to be an ICE detention center. And so I wanted to highlight that this very amazing place that people get married and it's beautiful, it has kind of a dark history to it. And so
Mhm.
that was one of the other reasons that I chose that spot.
Oh, amazing. Just what an opportunity. Even if it only happened the one or two times, that's
You
just
know,
great.
I got the video.
I'm gonna lean in here, if it's all right, and look at the questions.
Yeah.
Everybody for coming up close to the camera, but a boy's got to do what he's got to do.
You got to read them.
Yeah, that's right. Um, is I know that there's like Victorian widow rings or lockets where their husband's hair is intertwined into the jewelry and things like that. Is there more history to hair that you explored or discovered as you were researching or starting this practice? This question comes from, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced names, Rama Gainison, wanting to know a little bit about the history of hair in art.
Yeah, so there is a lot of and um there's a lot of things that I found out about hair, specifically like the Victorian mourning jewelry and how they used to preserve children's and loved ones' hair inside of lockets and stuff like that. And I appreciate that. And it didn't fit. And like a lot of the other history and cultural facts I found out about hair were from Black and Indigenous perspectives and Latinx perspectives, talking about when people were enslaved, they would braid their hair certain ways, so they would have maps on their head or put seeds and stuff in their hair. Um, or there's something called the braided Rapunzels of Nambia, and those are just very high honored women in the community that have these really amazing long braids. And so I do look a little bit at the history of hair, but I look more at what hair symbolizes and what hair symbolizes. So I do less on like the Victorian mourning jewelry or focusing on some kind of aspect of hair, and more about the visceral feelings of it. I don't think I answered that question properly, but I'm doing my best.
There's no right answer, and they can always type in a revision. But I'm also thinking like because I'm fascinated with like Louis the 14th and some of that earlier royalty type stuff. And so Marie Antoinette's wigs and hairstyles would reflect what was going on politically, socially, who they were, like the Turks when they were inspired by things from Turkey and whatever. So yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot about hair.
You can make a big or a simple statement just by wearing your hair. Um, you mentioned that someone gave you a bag of hair. Where does the rest of it come from? Or people, I know in my world, all I have to do is say that I'm going to do blah, 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 and 500 things show up at my door. You just people shipping hair to you, or what? How do you getting this material?
So I am using, this is synthetic hair. So
Yes.
not real. I have qualms about using real hair, but that's neither here nor there. And if you do use real hair, amazing. I used to use synthetic Kanekalon hair, which is a plastic-based hair. Now I've moved to using a plant-based hair. So I've been using hair for the past year and a half, using hair that's been made out of banana fibers, which I'm really excited about because there's a lot more eco-friendliness to it. And
Yes.
it's just and so yeah, I buy it from the beauty salon and they're like, what are you doing with all this hair? And I'm like, well, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, that's so cool, I didn't know you did that. So it's sometimes people will give me their hair and I'm like, thank you. And now I have like a box full of like live hair and I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. And I've been able to make this shift to a more eco-friendly way of using the plant-based hair, which I'm excited about.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, sustainability is key. And if you're getting the same response from the materials that you need, then, or that you switch to, it's a win-win for everyone, isn't it? So,
Absolutely. I think that there's still, because when people are braiding the hair, I feel like I said earlier, they're imbuing it with stories. So even if it doesn't come off of someone's head, it's still, we're still having conversations, we're still being vulnerable and trusting each other. And then that's getting all put into the braid, which then goes onto the sculpture with a purpose.
yeah. Um, Going back to working with a community or people from the community, Jose would like to know, um, are you, are these people volunteering their time? Are you hiring them to work for you? How is this organized and everything?
So I do offer a stipend to people. Many times they decline and they're like, I want to do this. And I'm like, that's very kind of you, but you are also giving up an hour of your time for my labor. Let me give you something because we live in this capitalistic society, even if it is 20 bucks. Because I know that money can't solve everything, but it's what we have right now. And my thank you only goes so far. And I will say though, that when somebody records an oral story with me, I do pay them for their time because that's emotional labor that they're giving me, and they're giving me something that's going to live on in perpetuity. And so I want to make sure that they get compensated for that as well, because that's a big part of their labor. And also, the organizations that I go into work with, I usually make like a donation to them as well, because I just feel like I'm coming in and I'm asking for something. Like I'm asking you to give me something. And like I said, we live in the society where money talks. And so like, not that I'm like paying people off to be like, let me do this thing, but more so like, here, take this so you can pursue the programs that you want to pursue as well too. And so it's not a perfect system for how I'm working in it, but I'm trying my best with, what I'm doing. And so I want to make sure that people get compensated in some little fashion.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that is great. And I think it's a win-win for everybody that
Yeah.
way. And
Yeah.
like you said, if most people are donating it back to you, it's just a gift that keeps on giving and everything. And you're very generous about all of this and everything.
That's kind.
Veronica, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We really do appreciate you being here. I'm sorry if I didn't get to a question. Veronica is available to answer through email. You can contact Handweavers Guild of America if there was a question that you need to. I bet if you are thinking about doing a community project, you now have a new mentor that you might be able to rely on as well. We want to thank our sponsors. We cannot do this without them. Halcyon Yarn, today's sponsor for this presentation. Please take a moment to look at their website and please support them for having supported us. We really do appreciate their support of Handweavers Guild of America and Textiles Tea. You can learn more about Veronica at her website, veronicaaperez.com, and that information was on that last slide, but saying it out loud does help with it all as well. I want to thank HGA for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. I want to ask our viewers, who are mostly members, to be sure you are keeping your membership up to date with this wonderful organization. And if you have been enjoying this absolutely free program, let me tell you that there are many people behind the scenes that make this happen. So if you've watched 20 episodes this season, you might want to think about tip the staff. I just made that up. But send something on your way to HGA for to say thank you for making Textiles Tea possible, because I will tell you that your membership is not paying for this program. It's completely free and put on by the staff, the wonderful staff at HGA. So we have rights as members, but we have obligations as well. So I hope that you will think about supporting HGA financially during these upcoming months. And that means more Textiles Tea are coming ahead. And I'm going to be back one more time with you next week as we get to visit yet another wonderful fiber artist who's going to inspire everything that we do. So thank you very much to everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy your tea or your adult beverage in your afternoon, evening times, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Cheers.